father of sexology, Alfred Kinsey, studied human sexuality in the late 1940s and released the controversial Kinsey scale of sexual orientation. Since that time, much more data has been gathered and much has changed. Dr. David McKenzie is a couples counselor and sex therapist who joins us on a regular basis to enlighten us on relationship issues. Today, his focus is asexuality. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. David McKenzie back to Studio 4 to tell us more.
Hi, Fanny.
Nice to see you again.
Always.
What does it mean when someone is asexual?
Asexuality is usually defined as a lack of arousability, a lack of sexual attraction to another, a lack of anticipation for sex. It does not mean that it is fear-based. It does not mean that they have repulsion towards their genitalia. It's simply, asexuals describe it as an orientation, and they prefer to see it as a biological driven rather than socially driven.
Is it biological driven, do you think?
The jury's out on that. My own practicum student is doing her master's thesis on this, and one of the latest studies was actually done by Dr. Laurie Brotto of the Department of Gynecology at UBC. And as far as I understand from her study, that the jury is still out in terms of whether it's biologically driven.
When Dr. Kinsey put the scale together in the late 40s,
That's right.
wasn't it 1948 or something?
Yeah.
As I recall, you start at 0 and go to 10 kind of thing. Is it
7.
Oh, 7. Okay, you explain it to me.
From 0 is pure or 100% heterosexual, 7 is 100% homosexual. And in between, it's either incidental homosexuality, both homosexuality and heterosexuality, but more heterosexuality. It goes right up the scale, showing gradation.
So somewhere between 0 and 7, we all fall.
Yes.
I believe we're born. This is the fake psychologist, Dr. Kiefer.
That's fine.
I believe we're born gay or straight or in the middle. It just makes sense to me.
Again, the jury
it's how you are.
Well, the jury is still out on that. There is an indication that is primarily nature, but also nurture is also involved.
I'm sure some is, yes, of course.
But even in terms of asexuality, even Kinsey suggested, I believe, that about 1% of the population is asexual. And in some of the more current studies, that's also an indication that about 1% of the population is asexual.
At a certain age, necessarily, from the beginning, when you're 15?
It usually shows itself from puberty and up. Whereas in puberty, sexual feelings, sexual desires, orientations are starting to emerge. An asexual person will not feel that.
For either sex?
For either sex.
What's the difference between somebody who's asexual and somebody who's bisexual?
Well, bisexuality means that you still have sexual desire, arousability, and attraction, but for both genders. I think it's wonderful to be bisexual. You know, Rodney Dangerfield said, the glory of being bisexual is it doubles your chance for a date on Saturday night.
You got that right.
But bisexuality is still a sexualized person, someone who is attracted to someone else, someone who is aroused by another person, either gender.
I was reading my Vanity Fair magazine on the break.
Yes.
And there was a story in there about somebody who is by Calvin Klein, who said he's had relationships with others. He's been married twice. He's had relationships with men. He had a brief period. It was almost sounded like a choice or an experimental part of his life, rather than remember, a sexual persuasion,
but
or orientation.
Okay, but a relationship is different from sexual desire. Many asexuals are in very committed, loving, romantic relationships. They'll have sex with their partners, but it does not come from a desire for a sexual drive or need. It comes more from keeping the relationship together. There's a sense of this is a normal thing to do. It is not fear-based asexuality. There is an indication, according to Dr. Brotto's study, of mild social inhibition. But in general, they're very capable of close, intimate, romantic, rewarding relationships. In general, there's no indication of psychopathology or anything like that.
That's interesting. Could it be that someone who is asexual is repressing something? For instance, in our society, we haven't been very kind to lesbians and gays, so it's easier to be hetero. It just is.
Yeah, sure.
So, could somebody who claims to be asexual really be a repressed homosexual?
Well, I mean, everything's
Guess
possible,
so.
but the study, from my understanding of the studies, that is not indicated. That in fact, asexuals, you can go to their website, which is AVEN, A-V-E-N, which is Asexuality Visibility Education Network. And right on there, the testimonies of asexuals will show that they believe it's an orientation, it's biologically driven, and that it does not indicate repression of any kind.
So orientation, not repression. When Kinsey studied it, he didn't seem to write much about it.
No, he didn't. No. There's not a lot written about it. In fact, I read through Kinsey. I had to read through it for my degrees, and both the male and female studies, and I didn't see a lot in there about asexuality.
Are more males asexual, more females asexual, do we know?
Yeah, more females are, I believe, are asexual according to the studies. One interesting study in Dr. Brado's finding is that in many males, if there is any indication of sexual arousability, if even slightly, it creates distress in them. Because on the one hand, they identify as being asexual, but when a mild sexual desire arises, it can create distress. But that was just a mild finding.
So someone who is asexual is not celibate?
That's right. They're very capable of romantic, intimate relationships.
And it seems to me all human creatures, all carnal creatures, need connection, hugging, touching.
Same with an asexual.
So if you are asexual, would you be totally satisfied with just that?
If you were asexual?
Yes.
Yes.
You know, you get hugged and loved and...
Oh, cuddling and warmth and a feeling of connection. Yes, absolutely. There's no indication that to be asexual means that you're antisocial. There is a moderate level of social inhibition, but that doesn't mean that those who are this way don't want a deep, rewarding relationship. And in general, they do.
Is there a way, if you're asexual, to jumpstart your libido so desire appears?
There's no indication of that. No, and that's why asexuals will say this is biologically driven. There's a deep sense inside that this is their orientation, and they prefer to call it an orientation.
It doesn't appear instantly. It's not something, say if you were abused as a child, you may...
No indication of that. There's no indication of that kind of early childhood sexual abuse or anything like that. It just seems to be part of them that they've noticed since puberty. When all of us are starting to get sexual and we're hormones on 2 feet, asexuals will testify that that was never part of their experience. But it's interesting you mentioned the Kinsey scale, because you're right. Excuse me. There's no indication on there of asexuality because he only identified 1% as being asexual. Sexuality, according to the Social Organization of Sexuality, which is the biggest study since Kinsey, would suggest that the orientations lie within us and they emerge at different times in our lives. So that it's not that we, and in fact there's now some indication in some current research that there is some mild fluidity in sexual orientation. So that a man who's been heterosexual all his life will suddenly start to discover some elements of homosexuality emerging in him in his 50s or 60s or maybe 40s. Likewise with a homosexual, other things. They'll start to experience some heterosexual feeling. So I'm not a proponent of believing that gays can become straight. That's not where I'm coming from.
Right.
But there is some fluidity in that. Otherwise, you know, men who have sex with men are not necessarily homosexual. Women who have sex with women are not lesbian. That is lesbianism and homosexuality are deep orientations.
Right. So you would call somebody who has sex with both sexes adventurous at times.
Yeah, I mean they're
experimental.
Sure.
Not necessarily oriented.
That's right.
In that particular way. Their preference would be a male-female relationship.
Yeah. Their fantasy life, their dream life, their thinking is all heterosexually oriented or homosexually or lesbian oriented. So it's...
Well, I find the scale interesting, the 0 to 7 scale, because you have some friends, we all have friends who have different sex drives, and some who are so hetero, they can't even fathom, you know, a relationship with anybody unless they're, you know, opposite.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And so you'll find somebody who is in the middle of that, bisexual. You'll also find individuals who are more towards one end of the scale than the other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. David McKenzie, our guest, couples therapist, sex counselor, and we'll come back and talk more about asexuality. Dr. David McKenzie, our guest. He's a couples therapist. He's also a sex counselor, a former minister, and a prison chaplain.
And a bagpiper.
Oh, right. Well, it's been musical day, as you know.
Yes, it sure has, yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't think bringing my bagpipes would win your audience over.
No, but you were a champion bagpiper.
Yeah, that's
People
right.
may not know that.
Yeah.
And I play a bad violin now.
Oh, I love violin. That's my favorite instrument.
You see, one day we could put together the world's worst orchestra.
Oh, I don't think so. It's all Celtic. Violins, bagpipes. Hey, we could have fun.
We could have fun, but I'm not sure we'll do it in this lifetime.
No, I think so.
Maybe in another lifetime when we figure out sexual orientation.
You got it.
Who is what. And because you see, when somebody knows that they are not straight, and they know it's tougher not to be straight, it just is, I'm sure that there must be a way in society that we can finally figure it out so that people aren't discriminated against because of their sexuality.
Well, I worked very, very hard when I was an Anglican priest. I worked very hard in the church to bring justice to gays and lesbians, to same-sex unions. And until our society works out many of the injustices it's perpetrated against gays and lesbians, we are the poorer for it. Yeah.
And well, the discussions we've had and are still having around same-sex union, is it a union, is it a marriage, can you call it marriage, that's blasphemous if you call it marriage, and it's, you know, many different religions have different views on this.
Yeah. Well, my problem is with anything that is concerning social justice, once it becomes politicized, then the ones who are the recipients of that justice are also often victimized.
Very much so. And I mean, we seem to have no problem in society with older men and younger women. In a marriage, Billy Joel has a 28-year-old wife. He's 56 or something.
And older women with younger men.
And older women with younger men and all of that. So age isn't a problem. Same sex is still a problem in this world, as you know, and depending on the country especially. I mean, in some countries you were killed.
Well, in part you can thank our Christianized heritage for that. And I have a whole lecture I give to UBC medical students and SFU undergrads on the role of Christianity in Western culture and how it's devastated Eros.
And some people say enough information already. Who cares anything more about where you are on the scale?
Exactly.
But the asexual aspect is interesting because if you really were, and you wondered all your life why you had no desire to have sex, it would be relieving to you to know that.
And that's exactly why they form the network group called AVEN, in which people who feel marginalized or ostracized will often come into groups together and share their common stories to realize, wow, I'm not alone. There are other people who feel like me. I'm not a weirdo. And no, they're not weirdos. Everybody is welcome in the human family, no matter what your orientation.
And I'm sure you wouldn't be interested in a sex trade worker because that isn't how you're oriented.
That's right, yeah, there's no desire there for sex. There's a lack of sexual attraction. Now, it's interesting that, again, in Dr. Brado's study, she found that a high number of men will masturbate. And when she asked them, why do you masturbate, the reason was for relaxing before I go to sleep at night. Sometimes a little bit of arousability will happen and I'll masturbate to relieve it. But it is not connected with romance. It's not connected with another human being. It's just getting the sexual relief. That's all.
So if you're asexual, that wouldn't be a thing. The governor of New York, by the way, is not.
No, no, he's not.
I know, the ex-governor, I should say.
Yes.
No, but that's interesting. So if you're asexual, self-pleasuring is not something you would be interested in.
No, well, self-pleasuring is because there can sometimes be sexual desire, sexual interest in just being relieved of a sexual, a little bit of arousability within yourself. Sometimes, one woman in the study said that at a certain time of the month in her cycle, she had a bit of arousability, but it was not connected with attraction or anticipation for another human being.
Okay, I understand that.
Yeah.
As a healthy woman.
Yeah. sure.
Yes, I get it.
Okay.
The sun does it to me.
Oh, same with my wife.
I know.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll have to do that story another day.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I never understood
I
that.
confessed here.
Okay, okay.
Thank
Fanny,
you.
We'll catch you on the beach.
No, you won't. Dr. David McKenzie, our guest. Every 2 weeks he drops in to talk to us about relationships. And tomorrow, Canadian tenor Richard Margison, once an island folk singer, now a serious international opera star, enthralls us with Beethoven's Fidelio and odd opera stories. And automotive journalist, our favorite car guy, Jeremy Cato, talks about the latest runabouts, Rolls Royces, and green machines. Thanks for watching Studio 4. There will be lots more on Shaw TV, only on Shaw TV.